In recent times, Russian and European economic life has developed many new and complex forms that require a, quote, work of analysis and synthesis, as well as proper classification in the first place. Naturally, here practice precedes theory, and theoretical work can only be carried out after the accumulation of sufficient material. It is also understandable that the preliminary approaches suffer inevitably from serious errors. Quote, confusion of concepts, end quotes, is the inevitable sin of human thought when it seeks new paths. Therefore, these errors are expressed logically with a bias and a deviation which are owed to a specific social position. In this case, a tendency is formed which can be qualified according to its social content. Lenin's recent speeches on the one hand and the series of declarations, articles, etc., all very symptomatic, emerge from the workers' milieu. On the other hand, they show the need for a critical analysis of some fundamental concepts of modern economics. 1. In the current discussions between the right and the left of our party, the question of state capitalism has been put forward. On this subject, Comrade Lenin proposed a series of formulations. Quote, to learn socialism from the organizers of the trusts, end quotes. First slogan, quote, state capitalism under Soviet power would be a step forward, end quotes. Second thesis, quote, state capitalism under Kerensky's democracy would have been a step towards socialism, end quotes, is Comrade Lenin's third thesis, which he put forward in opposition to the author of this article at one of the most recent meetings of the VTSIK. We now cite two excerpts from the journal Vestnik Metallista. Here is what Comrade Boyarkov writes in his article, quote, the problems of the demobilization of industry, end quote. Quote, the young workers' unions, which do not have much experience of class struggle and are not used to organizational economic activity, must take all responsibility for the state regulation of the economy. Given their astonishing lack of intellectual and industrial forces, without cooperating with entrepreneurs, the Russian proletariat is alone in imposing a system of control over economic forces, a characteristic of developed capitalism in Western Europe. And further, quote, it is not socialism or exclusively bourgeois order that we must set up in Russia. Against the backwards Russian bourgeoisie, we must set up a system of developed capitalism with state control over production, end quote. Then the author declares that he is under, quote, no illusion that socialism illuminates the East, end quote. Let us compare Comrade Lenin's declarations with the articles of Vestnik Metallista. Let us also remember Comrade Lenin's words on the ideology of the Metal Workers' Union, which is an example of proletarian ideology. We must understand that this correlation is not accidental. Obviously, it is a process of forming a tendency which is actually present in the working masses. Let us now analyze the logical aspect of the above-mentioned theses. We see that Comrade Lenin's, quote, state capitalism, end quote, is the same as the, quote, developed capitalism, end quote, of Vestnik. Therefore, we must first analyze this concept. What is state capitalism? From the perspective of the techniques of production, it means production controlled by the state, the liquidation of the anarchy of the free market in this domain, and, quote, strict control, end quote, exercised by authorities. Production and distribution are organized. Not only are the general conditions of the production process knowingly made part of the general plan of organization, but so too are the technical details thereof. From a social and economic perspective, this characteristic is not sufficient, because we must moreover analyze the relations between persons in the production process. State capitalism, or developed capitalism, is one of the forms of capitalism, a certain form of the power of capital. Therefore, there is no change in the principles of the, quote, economic structure, end quote. The principal relations of production of the capitalist system are those that exist between the capitalist, who owns the means of production, and the worker, who sells his labor power to the capitalist. Under finance capitalism, these relations are maintained. But unlike under industrial capitalism, the individual property of each capitalist is replaced by the collective capitalist ownership of the means of production. State capitalism is the outcome of finance capitalism. Therefore, the principal relations, the dominance of capital over the working class, remain entirely intact. But unlike finance capitalism, these multiple bourgeois organizations that concentrate production in their hands, private trusts, cartels, unions of quote employers end quote, etc., give way to a single organization of the bourgeoisie, the bourgeois, financial, capitalist, and imperialist state. If we are to characterize state capitalist society from the perspective of the relations of social forces, state capitalism is the highest power of the bourgeoisie. Here, the domination of capital becomes extremely and monstrously powerful. It tears down all of its enemies. In the first place, the proletariat, which is enslaved by the plunderous state. Finally, if we analyze the question from the perspective of the relations between countries, state capitalism means the aggravation of capitalist competition, the economic preparation for future destructive wars, quote, the militarization of the economy, end quote, significant development of protectionism, and the heightened danger of war. Let us now analyze state capitalism in relation to socialism. The social patriots of all varieties have declared that state capitalism is a type of socialism. Once the famous German revisionist, Edmund Fischer, believed that he had found numerous types of socialism, following the example of the Prussian or Bavarian kingdoms, which were introducing monopolies. The planning by the state of the monopoly of electricity. Here we have electric socialism. The force of water being monopolized. Here we have water socialism, etc. In view of the declaration of war and the militarization of industry, the social patriots declared it was necessary to support the existing government solely because the bourgeois state was in a process of degenerating into a classless, quote, state socialism, end quote. After all, we can understand that this characteristic of state capitalism is a bloody joke for the working class. For state capitalism means the immense strengthening of the domination of capital and the military class, as well as the merciless exploitation of the working class. It is not socialism, but a slave economy. And in order to build socialism, we must first and foremost destroy the monstrous apparatus of violence and oppression. This is why the extreme left of the Zimmerwald International proposed the slogan considered essential to the era, quote, down with state capitalism, end quote. This is why this wing refused to support all the measures that were competing to strengthen state capitalism, like the customs union of Austria-Hungary and Germany. In this case, the progressive character, from a technical perspective, of this form does not and cannot serve as a tactical criticism. Without a shadow of a doubt, state capitalism is a step forward in the terms of the centralization and concentration of capital. These are the contradictions of capitalist development. This, quote, step forward, end quotes, simultaneously means a rise in militarism, in the danger of war, in the oppression of the working class, and in the growing threat of socialist revolution. Thus, in short, the aggravation of the risk of colossal and barbaric elimination of the productive forces of society. This is why the current epoch imposes on the working class the task not of supporting state capitalism, but of destroying it. Imperialism, militarism, state capitalism, this holy trinity of capitalist barbarism must be blown apart by the proletariat. And our party understands this well. Let us recall the debate between the journal Novaya Zhizn and our press. While Novaya Zhizn, represented by the Bazarovs, the Azilovs, etc., were in favor of state control, we proposed the slogan of workers' control from below. And it was not because we were opposed to a central plan and a general organization from the bottom up. From our point of view, since the imperialist bourgeoisie possesses power, state control means the rise of state capitalism. inevitably accompanied by the enslavement of the working class. At the time, we did not all share Lenin's current idea that, quote, state capitalism under Kerensky's democracy would have been a step towards socialism, end quotes. We understood that finance capital, which had utilized the leaders of the petty bourgeoisie very well, would have found itself another prop at a time when it was losing all support. But that which was so clear then has now become obscure for a number of people. When Comrade Boyarkov writes, quote, it is neither socialism nor exclusively bourgeois order that we must build in Russia, end quotes. And when he admits that this order must be, quote, a developed capitalism, end quote, in this truly classic phrase is concentrated such an abyss of confusion, contradictions, and the most unbridled opportunism that reveal themselves here and there in the fragments of the speeches and declarations of many of our comrades. In fact, developed capitalism is represented as some kind of between society of transition from capitalism to socialism. And Comrade Boyarkov, a naive soul, says that capitalism, especially developed capitalism, is not an exclusively bourgeois society. We permit ourselves to reassure Comrade Boyarkov here that the state capitalism is bourgeois society par excellence, and in its purest form. For in this type of capitalism, the power of capitalist organizations is pushed to a limit never seen before. And it is in this society that Vestnik Metalista proposes that the workers, quote, build in Russia, end quote. What can we say? What a great task for socialist workers. Until now, the Marxists always scornfully turned their backs on the populists who invited them to, quote, draw the conclusions from it, end quote. That is, to open shops, quote, peddling capitalism, end quote, themselves. The Marxists thought that their task was not the dissemination of capitalism, but the organization of the gravediggers of capitalism. Now it turns out that this old point of view is obsolete. We have arrived at a caricature of populism. The fact that we are not disseminating it now, but building it, is of little consolation to us. 2. The reader must not think that Comrade Metalworkers and Comrade Lenin are preparing themselves without further ado for the actual construction of the same relations built by the Lloyd Georges, the Helferichs, the Rathenows, and the other oligarchs of Europe and America. This would be truly catastrophic if after the bloody war against the imperialist bourgeoisie and its agents, the triumphant proletariat built for itself a state capitalist society in Russia. In fact, having read the formulations proposed by Comrade Lenin and the, quote, qualified workers, end quote, of Vestnik Metalista, one could easily note that comrades are using words without properly understanding their meaning. Thus, Comrade Lenin speaks of, quote, state capitalism under the conditions of the dictatorship of the proletariat, end quote, and the author of Vestnik speaks naively of the construction of capitalism, quote, without entrepreneurs, end quote. The two are equivalent. State capitalism under the dictatorship of the proletariat is an absurdity, a nonsense, for state capitalism presupposes the dictatorship of finance capital, which means the submission of production to the dictatorial state. Quote, non-capitalist capitalism, in quotes, it is the greatest confusion imaginable. From this, we see that the comrades confuse state capitalism with control over production by the proletarian, or proletarian and peasant, socialist state. State control can have two forms that contradict each other in their social meaning and significance. Socialism and state capitalism, and their different meanings, depend entirely on the class in power. But there is no smoke without fire. And in reality, this is not just a confusion of words or terms. Unfortunately, this discussion does not only concern ideas. The domination of every class and its power must be analyzed not just as a static phenomenon, but in its dynamics, its development, or its regression. It is from this perspective that we must analyze the current situation. Class power consists fundamentally of two elements: its political power and its economic influence, and in the end, the decisive factor is its degree of influence over production. From this perspective, it can be understood that a workers' and peasants' dictatorship that did not lead to the expropriation of expropriators and the abolition of the power of capital and enterprise could not be but a passing phenomenon. Inevitably, it would give way to a bourgeois political regime, and its historical meaning would be limited to the destruction of the vestiges of feudalism. It is thus that we pose the question, in the era of the previous revolution of 1905 to 1907, when bourgeois democracy and not socialism was the order of the day. We considered the, quote, dictatorship of the proletariat and peasantry, in quotes, as a radical step in the history, sweeping away the last remnants of feudalism and objectively clearing the way for a rapid development of capitalist relations. It is this question that remains to be answered today. There can be a certain mismatch between the political and economic regimes when the pressure of the economy contributes to political transformation. Concretely, suppose that the Soviet power, the dictatorship of the proletariat supported by the poor peasants, which organizes state control in words, bequeaths in practice its management to trust organizers. What happens? The real power of capital grows and closes in on the economy. And either the political shell transforms little by little until it becomes despicable, or it explodes at some point. Because in the long run, the power of management of capital over the economy is incompatible with that of the proletariat over the political sphere. A similar situation is in the process of being formed here. If the tendency towards gradual conciliation with capital prevails, fortunately this is not yet the case, in the economy, it would be the creation of a strong power led by the capitalists that would sooner or later overthrow a political superstructure that would be absolutely intolerable for it. Thus, a complete state capitalism would be established and the political dictatorship of capital would hatch from the egg of the economic power of the leadership of the, quote, trust organizers, end quotes. This real internal danger is precisely what we spoke about in our theses. This danger to Soviet power is revealed in the political line of Gukhovsky, in the negotiations with Meshchersky, which in the end, fortunately, were fruitless, etc., and in the articles of Vestnik Metalista. This signifies an orientation towards foreign capital that wishes to establish state capitalism. Unfortunately, the comrades have forgotten that as state capitalism grows, the soul of the dictatorship of the proletariat leaves it. 3. Lack of clarity when we pose the essential question of state capitalism leads to a series of obscurities and errors in almost all questions relating to state control over production. Let us note here those concerning obligation to work and work discipline. According to the analysis above, these concepts can have two completely different and indeed opposite meanings. Obligatory work service expresses solidarity with the socialist dictatorship. It could equally be the total enslavement of the working class by state capitalism. Work discipline represents fraternal discipline under the socialist dictatorship. However, it is the murder of the soul and misery under state capitalism. As long as the tendency toward state capitalism persists, the first meanings of these concepts will always be transformed into the second ones, which would inevitably detach the working class from the party that leads the masses to state capitalism. In discussions with the left communists, Comrade Lenin claims in particular that the former do not understand the critical character of the current phase of the revolution, which confronts the proletariat with the necessity of everyday work. But we are completely agreed on the need for such work, and in particular the consequences thereof. Our real disagreements are totally different. They concern the line dividing state capitalism and the socialist commune state. It would not be difficult to show that the current conception of abandoning collective decision-making based on misgivings in the strength of workers' organizations fundamentally contradicts the great slogan once formulated by Comrade Lenin, quote, "Every cook can learn to administer the state," end quote. Nor would it be difficult to show that the trust organizers, not the technical staff, but the capitalists as such, have nothing to do with the old slogans which raised the level of activity of the proletariat. But all of this is outside the scope of this article. Let us return to our analysis of the, quote, fundamental concepts of modern economics, end quote. It seems that that word, so typical of our era, nationalization, is in fact responsible for the confusion of ideas. Nationalization means statification. But there are two kinds of statification, since the social essence of the state depends on the class which it rests. Nationalization is a formal concept from a certain perspective, because it says nothing at all about the social content of statification. When American capital takes the railways back into the hands of the plundering state, this is nationalization. When the Prussian state monopolizes the production of electrical energy, this is nationalization. But the transition of the sugar industry into the hands of the workers and peasant state, from the hands of the entrepreneurs, this is also nationalization. Clearly, in the first two cases, there is no, quote, expropriation of the expropriators, end quote. They simply transfer the exploitation machine from one hand to the other, from the hands of their trusts to those of their state. In the third case, the expropriation is obvious. Clearly, under the socialist dictatorship, complete nationalization means socialization and the transfer of a branch of production into the hands of socialist power. The word socialization is distorted by certain SRs who use it with a specific nuance, equal plots of land, work quotas, etc. This does not at all prevent us from so calling nationalization under the regime of the dictatorship of the proletariat. The distinction must be made between socialization and the occupation of isolated enterprises by the workers of those enterprises. During the revolutionary ascent, such an occupation transforms inevitably into socialization. If the revolution decays, either the phenomenon ceases because the workers are not capable of doing it, or improbably, other workers form artels, which are doomed to become, like most productive associations, a capitalist enterprise. Socialization of production is the antithesis of state capitalism. It is the step in the transition from socialism to communism, where the dictatorship of the proletariat withers away, and when classes dissolve into stateless communist society, which has become unified and harmonious. Our slogan, like that of the Communist Party, is not state capitalism. It is, quote, towards the socialization of production, towards socialism, end quotes.